Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and welcome back to this is a double review we're doing today. Bill and Ted's Face the Music, almost forgot the name of it then. Bill and Ted 3 is out in England in 2 days' time. And this is basically just going to be a catch-up. We're going to be reviewing Bill and Ted 1, Most Excellent Adventure, and Bill and Ted 2, Bogus Journey. So these are films that I've seen a few times, and you are literally hot off the press off these things. You knew of them. This is like old school Keanu Reeves. And I mean, we're going to be talking about this, but he is now John Wick. So this is going to be very interesting, I'm sure, for you going back and seeing what he's done. So this is going to be a very interesting take of films that I've seen in the past, and you've literally watched them in the last couple of days. So we're going to be talking about both of them today. Before we do that, we're going to go into socials before we get into our discussion on these two films. So over to you, George, for the socials.
Absolutely. So obviously we've pre-recorded this one today, folks. So if you're watching along, we have one of us in the comments. We'll have that open reading, so we're just not able to do this live. So as usual, the best way to find out about when we're doing videos, what we've got coming up, is finding us on Facebook at Cinema Savvy and on Twitter at Cinema_Savvy. We have now deleted Instagram as well because we just didn't use it too much, and we don't want to, tell you guys to sub it. So we've just got Facebook and Twitter on right now, and we also have a TeePublic link, which is in the description below. So check that out if you want to pick up a top. We've still got the Syncopy Nolan logo, as you can see.
Can't get rid of it. We love it too much. We can't get rid of it.
We've kind of been very fortunate in extending it, but we are working on a new logo, we think, / we hope. There's ideas going around, so obviously when if we can share them, we will. So it's kind of it's like a sort of temporary logo, isn't it? It's a great logo, though. Anyway, enough about logos. Yeah, Bill and Ted. So you mentioned the John Wick stuff. I'm going to jump in off the bat. So I just said I haven't seen these before until literally I saw the second one 30 minutes before we started doing this pre-recording.
Very recent.
And I'd always heard of it. I'd never seen them. And it was always, the sort of the list that never ends, right? You'll be in the same boat as me.
Yeah.
You tell someone politely, you add it to their list, and they'll take it as an insult. I'm like, honestly, there are hundreds of films I've not seen that I should have, and it'd be the same for everyone that's into film. So these were always there, and I don't know if there's an official term for the Keanu Renaissance, but as you said, he's John Wick, and I did see The Matrix when I was younger. I've only seen the first Matrix film. I've not seen the second or the third Matrix. And I didn't mind it, but I never had that Keanu hype that everyone else in the 90s because I was a child. I was 3 when that came out. Anyway, fast forward to the year 2015. Did John Wick 1 come out? God.
Oh, I think so.
Oh, God, that's
Here we go.
5 years ago already.
Wick, here we go. John Wick 1, 2014. You were very close.
Christ almighty. John Wick was, for me, this is one of the greatest action films I've seen. This is Taken, but better. Taken 1 is the key thing. And as you've seen videos on our channel, me and you did John Wick 2 as well. We both adore John Wick 2. To me, that's the best of the 3 so far.
Yeah, I agree.
I very much enjoyed John Wick 3. I think it's great still. I don't think it's on the level of 2. I think it's on the level of 1, maybe slightly under it, but it's still one of the best action films again. So to me, Keanu Reeves has become John Wick. I know he is to many people, even when Fortnite was good, when it first began, it was the knockoff John Wick that everyone wanted to be. Everyone wanted to be John Wick. And I can't sit there and say I went back and saw his old films. I knew the meme, the confused one. I sent it to you last night when I was watching the first one. I was like, which one's the meme from? It's from the first one. But I just, I never got around to these. And I didn't even know there was stoner films till the trailer for the third one came out. I didn't know anything about them. So obviously when I first I saw behind the scenes photo of Keanu with a shaven beard, and it's weird, and I don't know why I'm talking about the third one, but I'm as new as it can be. I knew nothing about this until that trailer for the third film. So yeah, it was a weird experience for me going to these. Not only to see young in these, it's Keanu Reeves doing a stoner film, which I didn't know. So I was intrigued.
The interesting thing is, though, yes, I guess you sort of lump this into the stoner category. They're not they're very much that persona, but they're very sort of harmless characters, which I think is what gravitates a lot of people to them. They're just sort of that Californian surfer dude, bro.
Surfer dude.
Kind of thing.
Ride the powder, dude.
Yes.
that kind of thing. And I kind of knew that from trailer 3, but I think it was the trailers are underwhelming because I hadn't seen the first 2.
Right.
So I couldn't have that, oh my God, Death's back. These are back. This is happening. They're back. The telephone's back. And I guess it's kind of nostalgia because, it is what, 89 and 91, these two came out around that point.
And it's this current trend that we're seeing where a lot of franchises are sort of being resurrected. It's sort of like going through a filing cabinet and going like, make another Bill and Ted movie. Like that was an 80s thing. That's something people remember. But the new one is written by the same guys. And I know that it's an idea. I don't think they've actually changed their idea for their film for the third one. From what I understand from the behind the scenes, they've had this idea, this script. I don't know if I'm assuming the script's probably been amended a bit, but it's going quite a ways back, this third film, but we're not talking about the third film just yet. We haven't seen it. So hopefully it lives up to these. But here's the thing. Obviously, we're talking about the first one right now, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. So 1989, this one directed by Stephen Herrick. This one kind of set the stage. Very, very small budget film. And it shows in the film. It definitely does. It was done on a budget of 6.5 million. This is according to Wikipedia. And it made 40.5 million. So definitely turned profit. And yeah, I think that's honestly part of its charm. This trilogy, what it has now become, the Bill and Ted trilogy, it definitely has a cult following, and I think that's purely based on the partnership of Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves in the film. I do think they are very endearing characters, probably not on the level, because we love Dumb and Dumber, and I'd say that in terms of characters, they're very similar to that, not as sort of slapsticky maybe as those two characters there. But it's that similar sort of dynamic, that sort of best friendship, sort of like inseparable, very similar kind of personas, each one of them. More so with Bill and Ted, I think, they're sort of finishing each other's sentences. They both have a very similar way of talking, and they're almost interchangeable as a character, really, in terms of how they carry themselves. And I think that's what audiences latch onto the most, is that pairing. Obviously, we talked about with Keanu Reeves, he's sort of like had this extra surge now, so he might even be bringing in new fans with this new film. Who knows? But these aren't like high art or anything like that. Then they're not going to go down in history as like one of the greatest trilogies ever made or anything like that. The moment you start to think about these or try and understand that, if you were to go Tenet on this with notes and try and unravel the time travel, it just immediately.
I did think of it.
Yeah.
The grandfather theory works. I did think of inversion. I'll talk to you after, because in case there's people watching that haven't seen Tenet. But there's actually some plausible Tenet theories. That's the bad thing about Tenet, isn't it? It's now ruining how I watch other time travel films. But no, with these two, you mentioned Dumb and Dumber. That's a great point. I hadn't thought of that. These guys aren't dumb. They're just, as you said, they're server bros. And they're just likable. Like, they're not nasty. They're not in your face. It's kind of like the great comedy pairing. You have, you're Dumb and Dumber. You've got Zoolander and Hansel from, obviously from Zoolander. And in the great comedy films, I think you always get these pairings of people, and it does need to work. And these two, they just seem like, I know it's Keanu, but I didn't sit there saying that's Keanu Reeves. It's kind of like I saw Bill and Ted.
Yeah, they
came across as two genuine friends that played that like friends, whether they're really close in person outside of films. You'd think so with the way you look at these. The way you look at sort of, and I know it's stoner films, and you're absolutely right. These don't come across as stoner films. They're not sitting there also getting high. It's just more the attitude of the characters. And I look at people like sort of James Franco and Seth Rogen, who sort of for our generation is probably the biggest comedy in that kind of humor. Especially sort of the obviously, well, not Tropic Thunder, sorry, Pineapple Express being sort of the tipping point of that. And I think that's what carries both of these. I know we're doing these individually, but as a whole, I think Bill and Ted as a duo, I think they work great with each other. I know they're kind of carbon copies of each other, but the fact that, one's slightly smaller, different costumes, different look, they feel the same, but enough to be different where it doesn't annoy you that they're like that with each other. And I just think on screen across both films, they're kind of a really good pairing with one another.
And I think when they're on screen as well, I might have to go back and check this, but I think when you see them on screen, it's always Bill on the left and Ted on the right. I might be wrong about that, and they might switch it up, but it's that sort of like easy signifier, and you don't need to sort of differentiate them because they are more or less the same character. And what I love about the Bill and Ted films as well, and I guess we'll sort of come to our critique as well, because I prefer the first one. I prefer Excellent Adventure to Bogus Journey. I know that you're opposite. You prefer the second one to the first one. But it's both are very simple stories. And that's why I like them. And that's why they're just a very easy watch. You don't need to think about them or anything like that. You just sort of get swept up. The rules make sense for the film. Like if you try and, as I said, like try and work them out, they kind of fall apart a little bit. But essentially they're flunking history class. They haven't been paying attention in class. They're not particularly the most brightest, the sharpest tools in the shed, whichever metaphor you want to use. And they need to study. They've got one night and they've got to do this presentation in front of the rest of the class. And if they don't get an A+ in that final exam, they flunk school, essentially. So they have to travel back in time through the character of Rufus, who we'll talk about in a second, who's really not in it all that much. I remembered him sort of being in it a lot more than he was, but then sort of rewatching it again, I realized that he's kind of an incidental part. With a time-traveling telephone box, go back to history and bring back all of the prominent historical figures for their talk and then deliver the presentation. That's essentially the plot of the first film. It's a very, very simple plot. But even the historical figures as well, all the actors they got to play those I thought were fantastic. Each one sort of gets a time to shine. You've got like Genghis Khan, Socrates, Billy the Kid, loads more as well. And I think that they all sort of get a moment, especially, Napoleon, where he goes to like the water park and everything and he's eating the ice cream. I thought that was some really funny stuff in the film.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because I knew it was time travel, I didn't know the capacity of said time travel. So it was like, we're going throughout history across these years, and I don't want to say it was like Monty Python, because I don't want to do these comparisons to other things, but certainly when they're in that sort of French sort of era, it felt very like Monty Python sketches are waiting to happen. And it's more that let's take, there wasn't any of that. We need to look like we're from this era. They kind of dropped that kind of thing. Let's just keep the two as they are and just take these two people, just chuck them into these different time periods. And I quite like that angle, that they were sort of collecting the historians as they went along. And yeah, the first, like I said, it's a simple plot, and I think it needs that. If because it's not right, it's a comedy. If they're going to start chucking in theories, as we kind of said, we don't want it to go overboard, but you start chucking in time travel theories or historical accuracy, like for a start, the whole thing's a parody of Doctor Who. It's the phone box, it's a time machine. However, this one isn't gigantic on the inside; it's tiny. That's why they're all squashed in there with one another. And
it does kind of get to the point, though, where you think the amount of people they get, there is no way. There's no way. Like, there's that one scene where it's sort of on its side and they're all kind of surfing on it, but then the very next scene, it's back to the normal. So there are some bits like that where it's like, how have they got like over 10 people in that? But you go along with it, don't you? Because it's just...
Yeah, exactly. And you're not meant to, not a Fast and Furious, but you're not meant to, switch your brain off, chill out, have a bit of fun. That's why these characters are the way they are. There's no scientists, they're not a Big Bang Theory type thing. They're just two Californian people just wanting to like chill out and go on this adventure with one another, and all the kind of terminology, I guess, is another thing to go on to. But plot-wise, it was fun. And even jumping to the ending of it, it's still satisfying. Like, you have the kind of very typical comedic ending where it's going to be a happy ending for everyone involved, but it's about how you build up to that and how they actually do it. And even that kind of thing, like that, okay, it was a history test, but they still sit there and bring forward all these historical people to come out one by one. I just thought it was quite neat. And so my main thing with the first one is, I don't know what it was last night, but the first one just didn't click for me. I don't dislike it at all. But I didn't like lean towards saying I really like it. I'm just kind of a neutral. I'm like, okay, I saw this film, and yeah, it was fine. I'll move on to the second one, and obviously we'll get to the second one in a bit. But enjoyed the second one a lot more. So I wasn't fully connected to them in this one. Maybe because it's the first one. Maybe it was the shock of seeing them the way they are, because it wasn't what I expected. Albeit I had seen the trailer for the third one, and maybe it was the reputation preceding it that was hanging over, because this is what everyone hypes up and speaks about. So I don't know if I went in with different expectations, but I still thought it was fine. I just didn't gravitate towards it like I thought I would, but I appreciated it more so than probably my enjoyment of it, because I can see why this is a cool film, especially the time it came out as well. That sort of 80s, they're at the mall, and nowadays you look at things like Stranger Things and everything, Wonder Woman's coming out. Everything's like, we've got to get back to the 80s. It's all the same stuff, like, look at these classic malls, all of this, but then you're sitting here watching something that was filmed in 1989. Well, it was maybe just before that, and yeah, they were there then. And, you kind of see as the years have gone by why people want to jump back to that era. But it makes it feel, it sounds really bad, because it's from like the late 80s, it makes it feel not dated, but it makes it feel like a piece of history. Knowing the fact that Keanu has hardly aged. And also the fact that, it is that I've seen the 80s so much, it looks like everything I've seen, which isn't a criticism. That's more of, I guess, a compliment to the other films that do go back to that era, because the 80s isn't a hard era to get wrong, and the last thing you want to do is make a bad film set in the 80s. So it was quite nice seeing that kind of actual, this was filmed here type vibe, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think honestly that's probably, I mean, I always talk about it on the channel, I have an 80s bias. I love 80s films, so I think that's probably why I like the feel of this one more probably than the second one. The second one, we'll talk about the second one in a minute, but in those short amount of years, I think, what was it? It was 2 years between each film when they were released anyway. So yeah, 89 for this one and then 91 for Bogus Journey. The change in tone just as a film is like night and day. You can definitely tell with the second one, you're in a 90s film. Just the way that it's shot, like with the wide angles and everything's all in your face, and the music as well. The music is the biggest shift. So the soundtrack to Excellent Adventure is one of my favorite soundtracks to any 80s films. You've got sort of those. I'm into those sort of bands like the hair metal kind of wave, which I guess Bill and Ted are kind of chasing after, you know, the sort of like heavy metal dude, that whole metalhead kind of thing. You have like bands like Shark Island and Tora Tora and Extreme, which are bands that I absolutely love. So it's interesting to see that shift where these bands were coming in towards the tail end of the 80s when the hair metal scene was huge, and then almost overnight in the 90s you went to grunge and alternative, and you see that in the next movie, which I thought was quite interesting. But I just love the feel of this film. It's very cheap. It's so cheap, like the sets when they go to the future. You just sort of got like these high chairs and then sort of like polystyrene walls around, and that's it, and it's great. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. So I did get this information from a Red Letter Media video, but there is a documentary which you can find on YouTube. I think it's around 40 minutes or so on the making of this film. I'm not sure if that's the one off the DVD or not, or if it's a separate one. The original time traveling machine was going to be a van, because they're sort of like part of a band. It was going to be sort of like a roadie kind of van, which would probably be easier to sort of get everyone into, I think, probably more than a phone box. But I'm not quite sure why they changed their minds about that and went with a telephone box. Maybe it was the Doctor Who comparison. I'm not sure. And the ending of the film was very, very different. It was much more low key. It wasn't in a sort of auditorium where they do with like all lights and everything. They literally went back to the classroom, and Bill and Ted just kind of sit on the desk at the side, and then they just let the historical figures sort of come out one by one and deliver a talk. And I think they watched it back and said, this isn't filmic enough. It needs to sort of be bigger than this. I do think it's probably a little weird that they do some sort of like history project in an auditorium. It does a bit weird, but it makes sense for the film, and you get, you know, each of the historical figures get their moment to shine. I just love the simplicity of this film. If I'm giving my final thoughts on Excellent Adventure, it's not going to win any awards at all by any stretch of the imagination, but the characters are fun, it's endearing, and I think it moves at a great pace as well. It's like just under 90 minutes, I think. You know, there's a scene where the telephone box breaks, and there's no sort of like drawn out scene where we're stuck here, we're stranded, how do we get away? Very next scene is chewing gum, fixes the antenna, and they're away. So it does move at a really good pace. I don't think any historical time periods outstay their welcome. It's always on to the next one. But yeah, that's pretty much all my thoughts on Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. And then we move ahead 2 years to the next one, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. The wait in between this one and the new one is very, very long, but it wasn't too long. This was 2 years after. And as I mentioned, that move to the 90s is very, very noticeable with this one. Different director, Pete Hewitt, who this was actually his directorial debut with this one. And I think as a director, it's probably more of a tighter film. And I definitely think the production value, you can definitely see the change there. There's more money thrown into this one. The budget's at 20 million on here, made 38 million, so still made a profit. But you can really see the budget in this one in terms of the sets, certainly when we get to like hell, which are some of the best things in the film for me, is that whole sequence. But talk to me about your experience there, because you literally watched this like half hour or even less before we got to do this review today.
Yes, I was a bit nervous, to be fair, because I didn't have that connection to the first one. I was like, oh god, there's two more. Obviously, the third one coming out on Wednesday, and I was a bit worried. And I put it on after work tonight, and I kind of clicked with this one. I don't know how quickly. I just, maybe it's suddenly they're in the future, and here's this. It's far more plot driven in the sense of, you mentioned simplicity was probably one of the best things in the first one. I agree. I think this one tried to add a bit more. I felt like, is this going to be one of them sequels where they try and do too much? I think that's probably, I guess some people probably do have that issue with this, but it's like, okay, let's introduce an outright villain for this film, because there's not really a villain in the first one. It's more of a, it's as it says, it's an adventure. And this one's like, okay, it's a bit weird having a whole villain. He wants to change history, you know, grandfather theory. We've spoken about that recently. Let's not get into that too much, but, you know, and then it's oh, look, here's my weapons, metal Bill and Ted. And the evil robots I was sold on the get-go. It was cheesy, it was silly, but it's exactly what this kind of film should have. Mm-hmm. It would have been horrible if it had been Bill and Ted, but really serious and dark. But the fact the robots were just Bill and Ted, I think it added this, not edge to it, but it made it funnier, especially when they're in scenes with one another, from obviously the past selves to the robots. And I was just kind of sold a bit on the back of that. And, you know, it was simple. Their goal was to kill Bill and Ted and change history. And everything from the girlfriends, you know, the weird engagement I thought was really funny when they're like, oh, we wrote the speech last night, and it's basically the exact same speech with like different words at different times. I thought it was really funny from that degree. And obviously then they die. I was like, oh yeah, like I wonder why death is in the trailers. I thought it was going to be like, they can't kill the main character, someone's going to catch them. I was like, oh no, they actually died. And it was just funny, and it's a kind of shame because having seen the trailer for the new one, you know, Death's playing hopscotch by himself. I know he's a weird guy, so it really took away the gaming scene, which is my favorite scene from this, from outright. And I thought he was just a really funny character to add to it. I felt more connected to their journey, I think, but that's because you've had the setup in the first film, you've introduced these characters, you've introduced the world. You know his dad's, you know, a bit of a weird one. You've got the whole like mom jokes in the first one. Now the mom and dad are together, so they're technically stepbrothers, which I thought was a really funny touch as well. And yeah, this whole film, just because I really enjoyed myself in it, and I was a bit worried. I was like, could it be too long? But no, it was the same. The pacing felt right. It kind of feels like comedy sequels are hard to do. Probably the hardest kind of sequel, more so than action and everything else, because you have to kind of not copy the jokes from the first one, but if you divert from the first film's comedy too much, you lose your fan base. But if you copy it, then you've kind of dug yourself in a hole. And there are very few great comedy films. The one I always jumped to is pun not intended, 22 Jump Street, which to me is maybe the best comedy sequel I've ever seen. And this felt really up in there. And it was weird because I know the reputation of the second one isn't as high as the first to a lot of people, but I just had a blast with this. And again, it felt like the pair of them just on an adventure. And I think I was just a little bit, maybe I wasn't as shocked as the first in terms of how they are, but I just certainly felt more with it in this one when I was watching it, and I felt more attached to the two of them.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely a tighter film. I think it's a better made film. I think it's just, it must just be the feel that I get from that first one. I guess, you know, that 80s film. This is, as I said, like very much 90s. And you're absolutely right in terms of the comedy sequels, because I'm trying to think of some now off the top of my head. I'm just thinking, you know, like Home Alone 2. It's basically exactly the same film as the first one. Now, I love Home Alone 2, but there are so many examples out there, so many examples that for some reason I can't think of right now. But it's the easiest thing to do. It's like, this worked in the first one. Let's just make it, you know, slap a different skin on it, put 2 at the end of the title and just make the same thing. This didn't do that because it would be, with the premise that the first one had, with time traveling and the historical figures, be very, very easy to just recreate that, just go to new historical periods. They've got to do something else, new characters and everything like that. And there's really only one scene where they do that. It's at the very beginning of the film where Rufus kind of introduces a few people from history. Like, I know there's Sebastian Bach, and they also throw some like futuristic people in there too. But other than that, they kind of go in a completely different direction with it. And I do think that this film is aided perhaps with that villain aspect, because there isn't really a villain in the first film at all. But in this one, you have, oh God, what's his name? Nomalus, I think his name is, or something like that. Played by, let me just find it on here, Joss Ackland, who I only know from the Pet Shop Boys music video, Always on My Mind, who's the creepy weirdo who gets in the back of the car. If anyone's seen that music video, you know what I'm talking about. And then, yes, Evil Bill and Ted, who I get the impression as well that maybe Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter had more creative input in this film. You know, there's, especially when you get to the nightmare sequences in hell and you've got Alex Winter in full makeup as sort of like the granny, it seems like they had more chance to play these sort of different characters. Essentially, they're playing them the same, but the sort of like evil kind of element to them where they're going to land on a cat or something when they land in the time machine, just little bits like that. It never delves into like completely scary territory with the villains. It's still very much that surface level, easy viewing, charming kind of film. They serve the role as the villains in the film. And I actually think that when both of them are on screen, like the good versions and the evil versions, it's very seamless in terms of the effects when you've got two Keanu Reeves on screen, especially because this is an early film as well. And I know they do something similar in sort of like the earlier Back to the Future films. I think it's Back to the Future 2, where you've got two Marty McFlys. And I always thought that, it does look really, really good, the effects in this. Those little ones. And then there's some ropier ones in there, but it kind of adds to the charm in there.
That's the thing. I think they had the chemistry with one another. Granted, it's the same people, it's the same duo, but it's villains with the heroes. And again, it was the fact that they were villainous, but they were villainous bros. They did whatever they wanted, their weird mannerisms, and I think it just works so seamless. As you mentioned, it's seamless when they're on screen with one another. It doesn't stand out. It doesn't look like there's doubles. It doesn't look like there's something horrible happening to make it work. It comes across very, very natural. And I just think it's when they're talking with one another, it just sold me on that as well. I thought it was not necessarily funny, the dialogue, but I felt like that's how Bill and Ted would be with one another. That's how a villainous Bill and Ted would be. I mentioned to you before we hit live, there was like a joke about the girlfriends where they've kind of kidnapped them to take them away, and one of them makes like a sort of like a crude comment. Like it's crap humor in the sense like it's not that funny, but it thought it was really funny for this one. And I think you mentioned maybe more creative control. This one feels slightly more adult, which is weird because it's only 2 years after in terms of real life. It's made 2 years later, but it feels not necessarily more mature, but it feels like they'd grown up ever so slightly, even though it's ultimately the same characters. I just think some of the jokes, maybe they were trying things which they probably didn't think they could do in the first one. Maybe that's where I'm kind of coming at it from. Like the whole, again, the death thing was amazing. Not best out of one, not best out of three. They just keep going and going, and the fact it was different.
As well, isn't it? Of that, I think it was a '50s film. Is it called Seventh Seal? I know there's a scene in that. I don't know if it's a black and white film or whatever, but there's a scene where they have to. I think the whole plot of the film is they challenge death to a game of chess. If he wins, he gets to live. If not, then he stays there. So it's kind of riffing on that. It's a really fun parody. I do love that sequence as well. That's probably one of my favorite scenes in the film. They're playing Twister. They're playing Battleship. They're playing all kinds of stuff.
And I think that's just something that gave it this more of an edge. And although Death is obviously, in theory, he's not a villain in this, but you assume he'd be like the antagonist when he appears on screen. Even from the weird, sort of makeup design feels intentional as a parody itself, keeping the hood down the bald patch, going up to heaven, the costumes, the voices. I just think I think I enjoyed the journey more. It felt a bit different with this one. But also it's the fact that you still have, at the end of that, an ultimate endpoint, which is they've got to take out the two villains, and then you have the main villain. And then, someone thinks, is that going to add too much? I like that I'm not saying they did a middle finger as the first one, but it's that great comedy of let's just do what we did at the end of the first one to beat them in the second one. Oh, let's go back in history and do it 2 days from now. And ultimately it works, but it's the whole the villain, oh yes, I did the same thing. That's why I now have the key. And it felt like, and it was quite funny. Then obviously the gun's got the kind of, Wild Stallions flag, sort of like Joker-esque on it. So I liked all that kind of stuff because again, it's kind of riffing on the first one, making a joke like, hey, we're not going to copy it, do it the same. Then actually, oh no, we just added an extra minute of tension. And I just think that went a long distance, just doing something, because they're making themselves aware that they can't keep doing that. Not to get into it, not to compare it to franchises and stuff like that. It just felt like as a comedy sequel that we took what people like from the first one and we just carried on with it. Now, whether I'm in a minority, I genuinely don't know, but I know that these two films are massive in terms of cult following. They wouldn't just be getting a sequel because Keanu's John Wick. They would have known that there is a fan base there, that people will go and see this. Certainly, probably people of, I'm not saying a different generation. I think people our age love it. A lot of people talk about it. But I can imagine a lot of people that grew up at that age, across those sort of like late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s. I can imagine a lot of people gravitating towards these. So I just thought it was a really fun way to carry on with it. And again, going to heaven and hell rather than back in time, it was a different take. Maybe that could alienate some people, but you want these sequels to do the same, and it still does have time travel in there to a point. I like that we get a little bit of a glimpse into the future and all the weird stuff, but I don't know. This one just clicked that little bit more with me, which I didn't think.
Yeah, and I think the supporting characters as well, some of the jokes they continue on from those. You've got the character of Missy, who we didn't talk about in the first one, who's the young bit of stuff that Bill's dad has shacked up with. And in the beginning of this film, it's like, oh, she divorced him and now she's married Ted's dad. So I thought that was kind of like a funny little running joke there with her character. Even Ted's dad as well. The whole possession sequence with the ghosts, I thought that was quite a funny scene as well, where he's emulating Keanu Reeves's surfer dude talk. That was good. My takeaway from this film, what I love the most, is sort of like the production design, or like the set design, especially where I really start to appreciate this movie is the moment, it's going to sound weird, where the characters die. From that moment there onwards, that's where I really started to get into it on a second viewing. Because this was only the second time that I watched it. The first time I watched it, oh god, I must have been like 19, I think, maybe, when I first watched these films. I watched them back to back when I went on a holiday, saved it onto my hard drive, and then just watched the two back to back. And yeah, but watching it again, I appreciated it a lot more. I still prefer the first one, but I remember coming away the first time really not liking Bogus Journey for some reason. I don't know why, but watching it again, I really did appreciate it more. I love the hell sequences, like the devil and those sort of really low ceiling corridors. You've got the scene with the grandma and the army general, and especially the Easter Bunny as well. The thing looks like Chucky. I thought that was really funny. And originally in the ending as well, like I think they were going over budget with a lot of the stuff. They had to sort of like throw pages and pages out because it was just like, we don't have the money for this. Those three demonic characters were going to come back just before they get to like the final arena. I think they're driving in the van and there's like a bit of a car chase, and then there's like a giant version of the bunny and like a giant version of the army general and everything, and they were going to have like this whole fight sequence, I think, with the robot versions of Bill and Ted. And then I think they shot half of it, and then they just said, this is like, we're already over budget as it is, just like get it gone. But that would have been interesting to see those come back for the very final of the film. You've got the weird station character as well, that weird sort of like two aliens that merge into the one big like one
station's creation, like
and everyone shouts throughout the film, like station, and I'm like, okay, I that's always confused me, that bit, really.
One thing I want to add, because you mentioned, I didn't know this, the van is obviously, you mentioned that they wanted to do a van in the first one, but couldn't do it in terms of time travel. So I like that they get, I guess it's not a time travel van, but they get the whole van dynamic in this one. That was pretty cool. So the shots of death. So I wonder if that's what these designs. And again, someone that's seen this late, I always think of fanboys when I think of comedies and vans and road trips.
Bring that up with the van.
I absolutely adore fanboys. If you haven't seen it, please do watch it. But like I said, it was just a good experience. And for someone that's new to this franchise as well, so weird to call it a franchise. Someone that's new to this, you know, it's very different to what I could have ever possibly imagined. And I think that's in the charm of it, that it's not copying anything else that's been done before. Like, it very much feels like its own thing. I don't think you get a lot of comedies can kind of blur into one, even though I mentioned I love Franco and Seth Rogen. You know, there are some great films there, but you can just kind of blur a lot of them together because they're going to have the same kind of things going on and on. And that's where I think it worked in this, that, you know, no one's been able to have done a Bill and Ted since. You know, it's a comedy double act, but they're so unique to themselves. It's not something that it's not Hollywood formula people can just copy. It wouldn't work without the two leads, and I think that's what carries the film is their sort of chemistry with one another.
Yeah, absolutely. And from where this film ends as well, the second one, it's going to be interesting to see how they pay that off in the third one, because there's a few things that I clocked at the end of this one where I'm like, I know you can't pick faults in it, but like actual things where at the end they have the two babies and they said it's Bill and Ted Jr. I'm like, well, have they had sons at the end of this film, but they've got daughters in the next one? So, I mean, it's the same writers, so they've got to sort of figure that stuff out. And even the end credits, you get all those sort of newspaper clippings that come up on the credits, and they say that, you know, they went on to intergalactic stardom and they played on Mars and they broke up and then they got back together and they did all this. But it doesn't seem like they're in that situation at the beginning of 3. So I'm sure it's all going to get answered. And I know as well, George Carlin, who played Rufus, obviously passed away. But the writers have said specifically that they're not going to recast Rufus So whether it's going to be some sort of cameo or deleted scene or stock footage, if they put him in the third one, I don't know. I'm interested to see the third one. It's not like insane hype. It's just curiosity. And in these current times as well, it'll be nice to just sort of watch a film that's sort of chasing after that utopian dream where everyone gets on and everything's perfect and everything's nice. Hopefully, if nothing else, it'll be a nice bit of escapism. But I definitely recommend Bill and Ted if you haven't seen it. As I said, it's nothing outstanding. It's just sort of a fun 80 to 90-minute movie with some enjoyable characters, some creative set design and everything like that, and kind of a really out there idea as well. I think it is quite an interesting concept to the film. It's a film that knows exactly what it is. And to be honest, I don't expect the third one to be any different from that when you've got the same writers working on it. But yeah, that's pretty much my final thoughts on it.
Yeah. Same here, pretty much for me. You know, it's a nice comedy duo. I can see why people do double bills. I think people are criticizing Cineworld for not everyone was showing these double bills, and I could see why fans would want to see both of them. They're quite short. That makes a long way in terms of wanting to watch these films again. I think that gives it a little bit more life. That, you know, if you're bored one evening, you can check this film and it's an hour and a half. You're done pretty quick. You don't have to stay up hours. You don't have to be in the right mindset to watch. You can just chuck this on and just enjoy yourself. And that's kind of my thoughts on both of the two of them. Like I said, they're unique comedies to their own right, and I can certainly see why they have that respect and that cult status that many of the comedies wish they could have. I think that is down to, again, the two of them and the, I guess, adventure / journey that they're on in these. Trying to think of awful Hobbit pun them, but I couldn't. But that's kind of everything I'm going to say on Bill and Ted. I'm going to kind of obviously mention we're going to review the new one. That's why we're doing this. We're going to review this on Thursday, the 17th of September. So it's 2 days from now. If you're watching this on Tuesday when this goes up, it's released in UK cinemas on Wednesday, the 16th. So we will have that out for you all. And again, as usual, the best way to find us to see what we do, what we've got coming up, is on Facebook, Cinema Savvy, and on Twitter, Cinema_Savvy. One thing I want to quickly mention, we're in the process of going over a lot of old artwork on the channel. You may have seen a couple of tweets with some photos. We now have 2 big playlists. I'll say this at the start of the next video as well. On the channel, we've got our Star Wars reviews all grouped into one, and we've got the Harry Potter reviews all grouped into one. Most of these were recorded 4 or 5 years ago. You know, some of them, they're not even me and you. No, none of them are me and you unless it's the modern films, as in on Faces. It's audio. That's how old school they are. So if you want to check them out, have us talk about something different, have a look at them. It's been nice to revisit them, to do some artwork for them, but we're going to be making some sort of artwork changes across the channel. So keep an eye out for that. You may find content you thought you'd want us to do one day, which you may have already done. Who knows? So right at the bottom of our YouTube channel, you'll be able to see them on seasonal playlists. I just wanted to mention that. But
hopefully
yeah,
that's a bit more easier to navigate as well, especially you know, bigging it up. Mandalorian season 2 coming out very, very soon. We've got playlists for all of our stuff, and George is very kindly a much needed overhaul on a lot of the thumbnails dating back. So he's putting a lot of hard work on those. Go check those out. But yes, we'll be back in 2 days' time. After this goes, it's so weird doing these pre-recorded. Bill and Ted Face the Music, and yeah, we'll see you on that review, guys. See ya.